What's up, Tribe 2.0? We are here to discuss Indigo chapters 4, 5, and 6. And so, chapter 4, overall, for these next three chapters, we start to see that the two main characters, Galen and Hester, who I don't think I said Galen, I think I just kept calling him the Black Diamond in chapters 1 through 3 video, but his real name is Galen. And he actually tells her his real name, and she doesn't really believe him because of the rules of being on the Underground Railroad. Is that a lot of the conductors did not, they had aliases and they didn't really use their real name. And so she's like, who, Galen? Who would be Galen? So she didn't think that was his real name until later on when we talk about it. So chapter 4, he's getting better and he's very irritable. He's rude even, right? We find out that his stitches are starting to itch and he wants to cut them out, and he's just really brooding and rude, and she is really like, I'm gonna need you to calm down because you're doing a lot right now, and I'm gonna need you to get it together. He Now that he's feeling better, he starts to get a little curious about some things, and we see where she goes outside to pick apples, and he comes out to help her, and she's kind of like, dude, what are you doing out here? Like, that there are like slave catchers all over. And he was like, I was going stir crazy in that cellar. Like, I know I won't be out here long, but I just needed some fresh air. And I think all of us can relate to that after the last year where we've been in the house and limited interaction with other people. We find out that she lives on her father's land, her father's apple orchard, which was, she said, was his his pride and joy. But over the years, it's sort of falling apart because she couldn't afford to employ the people that was needed to keep it going. I think she said they had over 200 trees, and so now she makes money off of letting other people come on her land and pick the apples, and them giving her a percentage of what they make off of the apples, and then she picks what's left to kind of make her own thing. She always keeps a stash for herself. So we're finding out a little bit about how she's making do, like how she's living day to day. She has a fiance who is in Oxford finishing up his studies, and she's waiting for him to come back, but she realizes, I haven't been sending him any letters since Mr. Black Daniel came into my house. So as we go through, I want to see, I'm going through because I make my notes as I read, so I can make sure there's certain things I want to tell y'all. So she tells him the story of her ambush, and what happened was, he was transporting the family that came with him that night. He was dressed up because he's very light skinned. He's described as being very light, and so he was dressed up as a woman. He had on makeup and everything, and he had had a scarf on, so to try to disguise as much of his features as possible. And the ruse was that the family that was with him, they were his servants, and they were taking him home for the night, or her, And they came across some slave catchers, and in the beginning, it seemed like they were buying the story. But then, there was a man, a woman, and a child. So the catchers were like, hey, we've been on the road for a long time. We ain't had no good comfort. Let us take that, your girl out in the woods for a little while and have a good time. And so, of course, Galen was like, that ain't about to happen. And he tells them no. They grabbed the little boy and they put a gun to the little boy's head, and they're like, now what you gonna do? And that's when Galen comes out of his disguise and says, listen, y'all take me. I'm the Black Daniel. That's who y'all been looking for. But let them go. And they proceed to beat him. And eventually, the Wesleyites, who we talked about in the first chapter, I think we did, I hope we did, they're abolitionists. They came through and they saved him, but not before one of the slave catchers told him, listen, y'all got a snake in y'all midst in Whitaker. And so that's why he is convinced that there's a traitor in Whitaker, because that's what they told him. And Hester was like, okay, well, you can't just believe everything that a slave catcher says. He said, yeah, but they ain't had no reason to lie at that point. They thought I was dead, or they thought they would get ready to kill me. So that's how he got rescued. That's how he ended up at her house. Okay. So then Hester goes to a church meeting, and once again we find out about how I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Couple other things. That is when he starts calling her petite. Now he's got two nicknames for her now. He calls her petite and he calls her Indigo. And he also, and the only reason why I'm bringing this up because I know it comes back later on into play. Instead of wearing perfume, she wears vanilla. She dabs a little vanilla behind her ears. She said, I don't have money to be spending on perfume, but I still am a woman. I still want to smell nice. So I put a little vanilla behind my ears. Give me a nice little scent. So in chapter 5, we see her going to a meeting. And once again, there's just a lot of history in here. And a lot of this history is real history. They're talking about groups that were started by people, real people. David Ruggles, and he started a vigilance committee. And Ella, another name I had underlined. Hold on. Anyway, a lot of people. But it's a lot of real history in here, you guys. And so we see how very intricate these secret societies were. They let people know that there was a meeting coming when the B, the doctor, she delivered the eggs to everybody. And depending on what color the cloth that the eggs were wrapped in, let you know if there was a meeting. So if it was red, there was a meeting. And on one of the eggs, the time was written. So they knew. So there was a meeting at the church. Only a few people showed up because, once again, slave catchers are out. It's really dangerous for people to be out there by themselves. So it's not a whole lot of people out there running around. And so it's the reverend, and the way that they would give them cover for their meetings is that they would have choir rehearsal. So the choir was upstairs rehearsing while they were downstairs meeting. And that way, if people came along and saw buggies in the, out in front of the church, it wouldn't be suspicious, right? And so they're talking about what's going on with the slave catchers, and they said, listen, we meet a new character, William Lovejoy, who it's funny because he's an abolitionist. He's on the Underground Railroad, but he still has no use for women. That's very interesting, right? That he could still be very compassionate towards the plight of slavery, but he still feels like women are inferior. And so him and Esther and B sort of get into it. And Esther ends up letting them know what's going on with Black Daniel, telling her that there's a traitor in amongst them. And she even lets them know that the Black Daniel was staying at her house. And Lovejoy was like, well, he needs to stay with me. He needs to stay with the man. Why is he staying with her? And they were like, because that's where he is. That's where he's going to stay. It's too dangerous to try to move him. And she seems to be doing fine with him there. And so, of course, the less they know, the better. But he's there, and it is what it is. The reverend makes sure that she's good, because again, they're on the railroad. They're conductors, and so they have men in and out. She has men in and out of her house all the time. But because of his reputation and everything, he just wants to make sure, like, you good. You by yourself with this man. Are you okay? And she was like, he's fine. He's a little rude, but he's okay. So then the next day, she tells him about the meeting and everything. And she tells him, let's move upstairs. Why don't you move upstairs? I mean, he was like, I'm going stir crazy down here. Can I please come upstairs? And she was like, I don't know if that's a good idea. But she ends up letting him come upstairs, and she takes him all the way up to the attic. And what we find out is that this house is just jimmy-rigged all over the place. There are secret passages in every single room that will take you to the underground tunnel and give you an escape in case you need one. And so she says when people are staying with her, she always has to, she always shows them where the escape route is and how to get out. She said there's one in every room. And so she shows him all of the ones except for the one in her bedroom. And he was like, well, I need to see the one in your bedroom too. And so she reluctantly takes him in there. And of course she's a little embarrassed because he's seeing where she sleeps. And he actually sees her nightgown and she grabs it up real quick. It's a real cute scene. But this is where we see the first time he really flirts with her, because she says, have you seen enough? And he was like, not nearly, but I guess it's gonna have to be okay. So this is the first time we sort of see that whole flirty thing going on. The other thing we found out is that the room where he's staying actually has an indoor tub with a drain on it. Now, it doesn't have a faucet with running water. She was like, you still got to go to the well and bring water up here. But when you're done taking your bath, you can drain it. And he said, that's why a lot of us don't even use the tub because it's just, it's too much to bring the water up. But it, again, it's modern. That's a modern thing, and the tub is beautiful. It's described as being very beautiful. So they talk a lot about the different slave acts and how it affected the abolitionist movement and stuff like that. I'm not going to get too deep into it. We already talked about the Fugitive Slave Act, but they just give you a little more information, some that I said, and they add to it. We also found out that Ezra Shue is not leaving. He is staying in town, and he is staying with Greer, who's another local slave catcher, okay? All right, so that's chapter 5. I just wanted to look at my notes, make sure I said everything I wanted to say. Okay. In chapter 6, we find out a few things. Galen realizes that Hester is not eating when he eats. He realizes she's not eating when he eats. And he eventually figures out that she's not eating because she don't really have a lot of food. And he's kind of eating her out of house and home. And he was like, listen, don't ever starve on my account. When I eat, you eat. And he actually makes her sit down and eat. And she was a little embarrassed, I'm sure. But she was like, listen, I'm used to just not doing. I have a little bit of an inheritance. My father left me this land, and I make do. Like I don't live as a rich woman, but I'm okay. I'm not starving either. She writes for a local paper, and she gets paid for that. And she lives. And she said, if push come to shove, I can always sell some of my land. I don't want to do it, but I can. I know it's there, and I know that I can sell some. So we get into that a little bit. Galen also starts to realize how beautiful she is. Remember before when his face was swollen, he was like she was passable. But now that his vision's clearing up and he's seeing a little clear, he is like, oh, she is gorgeous. And what I love about Indigo, and we're not going to get into no conversation about colorism, okay? But we know that Galen is described as being light-skinned. We find out he's from New Orleans. We're going to get more information about him as we go on. But he's very light. The fact that he could pass as a white woman, we know that he's very light. But Hester is described as dark-skinned. And he even says, and I underlined this because I wanted to read it to y'all. Her skin looked like the gift of an African night goddess, dark with the true colors of her ancestry. So the fact that she's dark skinned, that's how she's described, and that he's in love with that complexion, honey. He loving that melanin. He loving that melanin. Now the other thing that happens in this chapter, again, we have another little moment where she's taking him his food, and he is in the tub, honey, and he naked. And she was like, I'm sorry, I knocked. I thought you said come in. He said, you know what, I did out of habit. I apologize. And she was like, oh, so you used to just women just, waiting on you while you naked in the tub and stuff. And he was like, yeah, kind of. And he gets out the tub. She turns her back, but baby, the way the mirror is positioned, she could see him in the mirror, and she was sneaking peeks at him in the mirror while he was getting wiped off, getting the towel down, getting ready to be presentable. And he caught her looking, and he was like, "It's okay, it's all right, look." So you see that the flirtation is growing from them. We get two things in this chapter that are very important. Hester tells two very important stories. She tells one story about being on the plantation and being reminded that her hands will always mark her as a slave. Because she says something, she says, surely if there are women in your life who will willingly enter your tub, what use would you have for an unexperienced or inexperienced purple-handed ex-slave girl but for amusement? And he tells her, don't devalue yourself. And he continues to call her Indigo. And so she tells him the story about how she was told, listen, your blue feet and your blue hands are going to mark you a slave for the rest of your life. And so she knows that that's sort of a thing that she's going to have to deal with. The other story we get is she tells a story of how she was rescued. A solicitor came to the plantation, bought her and two other slaves. He then took her to another home where they rode up north to an abolitionist up north, where eventually she was reunited with her aunt. And come to find out, it had taken like 8 years for them to find her, because the information her father left to who she was originally sold to, come to find out, he lost his plantation and lost his slaves, and they were sold away. She was a baby at the time, and so from the records, they had to just examine every single plantation where those 6 babies were sold before they found the right one. And of course, this took money, this took time, and the way she ultimately was recognized was because the tip of her pinky finger was cut off, and that's how he recognized her. So that's how she was rescued. And so that's an important story, just to get a little bit more information from on Hester, a little bit on her background. But ultimately, we find out in this chapter about Hester's finances being a little funky. And the other important thing was that he asked Hester to send a wire for him. Now, clearly it was in code. She couldn't make heads or tails of it, but it was sent out. And so that is where chapter 6 ends. So the next video is going to be chapter 7, 8, and 9. And again, don't forget, we're going to be doing this live on Monday. We're going to be talking about chapters 1 through 9. I hope to see you guys there. Talk to you later. Peace.